Hello, welcome back to Wednesday Word. I'm excited that you're here with me as we conclude today our study of the prophet Elisha. For the last several weeks, we studied Elijah first and then moved into the ministry of Elisha. And the last time, if you were with me, we saw that Jehu was anointed king. And that was quite an episode. Remember, one of the sons of the prophets, a young man who was a servant of Elisha, had been told to go in, take Jehu into an inner chamber of the house and anoint him privately and tell him that he was king, and then instruct him to annihilate the house of Ahab, which would have been in accordance with the prophecy issued by Elijah. So we know that happened. We know that Jehu and others had been there fighting a battle against the Syrians. Remember, Hazael had become the thorn in the flesh that was prophesied as well. And so now we have this young man who's been anointed king, and his compatriots, his peers, his other commanders who've been fighting, literally throw down their outer garments on the steps of the house and pull out the trumpet and start shouting, Jehu is king. So we knew that that was going to have some very fast ramifications. The same way that young son of the prophets had run away quickly, things were about to quickly unfold. And I think as we were concluding last time that I made the statement that what's about to unfold is not kind and gentle, but it is forceful and literally a bloodbath. I hate to use that terminology, but that's what it is. So let's go back now. I will admit up front that this session, this lesson, this time together will be just a little bit different because there's a good deal of scripture here and an interlude where Elisha is not going to be mentioned. So I'm basically going to manage some of this material. I'll read some of it and summarize some of it as we conclude the portion over which Elisha had an impact. Now, I told you last time, Elisha is basically concluding everything that God told Elijah to do. And I think I told you that there are lessons there for us because it's not about who gets credit or whose mission. It's about accomplishing what needs to be accomplished for the kingdom of God. And this young man, Elisha, had done exactly that. Okay, back to our text. We're actually in 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 14 through 26 as we start. So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had been defending Ramoth-Gilead, he and all Israel, against Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from wounds which the Syrians had inflicted on him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, "If you are so minded, let no one leave or escape from the city to go and tell it in Jezreel." So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel. For Joram was laid up there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see Joram. Now a watchman stood on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came, and he said, "I see a company of men." And Joram said, "Get a horseman and send him to meet them, and let him say, 'Is it peace?'" And Jehu said, "What have you to do with peace? Turn around and follow me." That's what he said to the messenger that was sent out. So the watchman reported, saying, "The messenger went to them, but is not coming back." Then a second horseman who came to them and said, "Thus says the king, 'Is it peace?'" And Jehu answered, "What have you to do with peace? Turn around and follow me." So the watchman reported, saying, "He went up to them and is not coming back." And the driving is like the driving of Jehu the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Then Joram said, Make ready. And his chariot was made ready. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out, each in his chariot, and they went out to meet Jehu, and met him on the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. Now it happened, when Joram saw Jehu, that he said, Is it peace, Jehu? So he answered, What peace? As long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft are so many. Then Joram turned around and fled, and said to Ahaziah, Okay, treachery, Ahaziah. Now Jehu drew his bow, and with full strength shot Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow came out of his heart, and he sank down in his chariot. Then Jehu said to Bidkar, his captain, Pick him up and throw him into the tract of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I were riding together behind Ahab your father, that the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says the Lord. And I will repay you in this plot, says the Lord. Now therefore take and throw him on the plot of ground, according to the word of the Lord. Remember that, okay, not only is Jehu anointed, but that anointing is basically equivalent to treason, because there is a sitting king already, even though he's wounded. So knowing that it's a precarious situation and that he needs to move before word gets back to Jezreel and Joram figures out what's going on. So he basically says, hey, we could probably benefit from keeping people from leaving the city and telling what's going on. So he basically ordered that no one would leave until he could take action. Now, we don't know exactly where Ramoth Gilead is or was. Some think it was about 50 miles from Jezreel. So if that were true, and Jehu needs to go from Ramoth Gilead to Jezreel, that's a pretty good drive. He's in a chariot and he is driving like a madman. So I wouldn't think that it would take a whole long time at the rate he was traveling. So, okay, we do know that Joram had fought for Ramoth Gilead and had taken it from the Syrians because it needed to serve as an outpost because of all the raids that Hazael and his troops were making into the northern kingdom, and they needed that territory. Syria would take things, Israel would try to take them back, and there was a lot of that exchange for a number of years there for a period of time. So we see that King Joram is wounded, he's recovering. King Ahaziah, who is over Judah or the northern kingdom, has come to visit King Joram. So Jehu is approaching the walls and the gate of Jezreel. There is a watchman there, and he says, hey, there's a rider coming. So the king orders that a messenger be sent out to see if it's peace that Jehu is bringing word about. Now, you do understand that initially here, what Joram wants to know is something going on with Syria? Has there been a problem in the fighting? Is everything going well? Now, we know there's a lot more going on than that, but at the beginning, initially, Joram does not know that. So his questions, because we know more, don't seem the same to us as they were probably intended from him. So Jehu's like, look, you don't have anything to do with peace. Get in line behind me. And so still he's driving quickly in that chariot, approaching Jezreel. And so when it's reported that the messenger doesn't come back, a second one is sent out. And then the same thing is said to him. He falls in line behind Jehu, and the watchman on the wall says, well, this one's not coming either. So the king, Joram, and the king of Judah, Ahaziah, decide they'll go out and meet Jehu. Again, they don't know what's going on. And so when they approach him, they say, Jehu, is it peace? Is everything going okay? And notice the response. There won't be any peace as long as the idolatries and the witchcraft of Jezebel are wreaking havoc and creating horrible influence among the people. There won't be any peace. Well, the minute Jehu responds that way, Joram or Jehoram in some text and in some places, he knows he's in trouble. So he turns to run from Jehu, I suppose, believing that he can get behind the city walls and close the gates and be safe. But Jehu strongly pulls, not just an arrow, pulls the bow back, shoots him in the back, and it comes out his heart, and he slumps over in his chariot. Now, notice what Jehu instructs that would be done with his body. He says, throw it over there on that property that used to belong to Naboth. Now, you remember the story. Jezebel had him killed simply because Ahab coveted his vineyard and his property. And repercussions and judgment come from those things. So now a descendant connected to the family of Ahab is thrown over into that property dead. Okay. If I am Ahaziah, and if a daughter of Ahab has become the matriarch in my family line, I figure I'm in trouble. Let's see what happens next. And we'll go back to chapter 9 of 2 Kings, verses 27 through 29. But when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the road to Beth-Hagan. So Jehu pursued him and said, shoot him also in the chariot. And they shot him at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants carried him in the chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David, because he had that mixed lineage, the lineage of David, and now that daughter of Ahab has been married in. Verse 29, in the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king over Judah, but now he would be king no more, because he too has been executed or assassinated, call it whatever you prefer, by Jehu and the men who are with him. I mean, it took Ahaziah no time to figure out what was about to happen to him. You know, some say that Jehu was thinking ahead and he figured his men could take care of Ahaziah, take him to be buried in the city of David, which is in Jerusalem, and that he would basically meet up with them in the pass of Gur near Ibleam. And Jehu set out to continue to do what had become his mission while his men took care of this body of someone who was a king and should be buried. And so you have a parting of the ways briefly there, even though it's a little vague in Scripture. With the geography that's involved, that's exactly probably what happened. Okay, now back to our text, this time verses 30 through 37 of 2 Kings 9. I think most of you will be more familiar with this passage maybe than with some of the others. Now, when Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. Okay, so we've taken care of Joram outside the city gates. Now Jehu has entered Jezreel, and of course the watchmen and people on the wall have seen what occurred. So you know by now the word is delivered to Jezebel. There's no doubt. So Jezebel heard of it, and she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through a window. Then as Jehu entered at the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Now wait a second. Jehu is the son of Nimshi. He's not the son of Zimri. But there's a connection here. Jezebel's trying to make a point. Verse 32. And he looked up at the window and said, "Who is on my side?" So 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. Then he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses. And he trampled her underfoot. And when he had gone in, he ate and drank. And then he said, "Go now, see to this accursed woman, and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." So they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Therefore they came back and told him, and he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse on the surface of the field in the plot at Jezreel, so they shall not say, Here lies Jezebel." Okay, why did she call him Zimri, murderer of your master? Well, there's a really good reason why she did that. If we go back to 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 8 through 10, we'll see that explanation recorded. And it says, "In the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, Elisha, son of Baasha, became king over Israel." Now, I already told you that the first 3 dynasties of the northern kingdom had already been destroyed. Baasha was one of those. So we know that if Elisha is of that dynasty, he wasn't going to last. And he reigned 2 years in Tirzah. Now his servant Zimri, a servant, not a son, his servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, conspired against him as he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of the house of Tirzah. And Zimri went in and struck him and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his place. So Zimri killed Elisha, who was then king and was of the dynasty or lineage of Baasha. Now, I didn't read far enough for you to know that Zimri didn't rule long either. So there's a double message here coming from Jezebel. She is saying, Jehu, you killed the king. Your hand touched the king. And not only that, remember, like Zimri, who rose up and killed his master, you won't last long. Something will happen to you, or at least it's a threat on her part. Now, that's not exactly going to be the truth. He will reign longer than a lot of the people in the northern kingdom did, but there are some issues that we're going to develop. There's no doubt about that. So Jehu, he's come into Jezreel. Jezebel knows what's going on, and Jehu sees her when she looks out the window, and notice she got all primped up for what was in front of her. That's interesting. And she looks out the window, she taunts him. Jehu hollers out, "Who's on my side?" It's like he's basically forcing or calling for people who are witnessing this interaction, this altercation, to choose sides. And 3 eunuchs, and it was very common for servants around a king to be eunuchs because producing an heir was very important for a king's line. And so sometimes there were things done that were unthinkable in the name of preserving the lineage of a king and making sure that the people around him were no threat to him. So 3 of these eunuchs look out the window, and there must have been some sort of signal between them and Jehu, because he calls up to them, "Throw her down." And so these 3 men grab hold of Jezebel and throw her out the window. I don't know if that was a balcony or if it was just a window, but it certainly sounds like it wasn't a first level or first story window, because when she landed on the ground, her body impacted and blood splattered. So we know that it was a traumatic fall and that her body took the force of the fall and there was significant damage there. Okay, the text said that Jehu trampled her. That's not exactly accurate. The horses ran over her and the chariot, it sounds like. And so her body was in pretty bad shape. Now, some people think that Jehu was very callous, almost to the point of being cavalier. He goes in and has his dinner or whatever meal it was. And after the meal, I don't know whether he got to feeling a bit guilty or what it was, but he recalls, look, this woman was the daughter of a king and married to a king, and her body should have been treated better than that. So he doesn't go himself, but he sends others, and he says, look, go take care of her. Go bury this king's daughter, this princess. And they come back to him and report, well, there's nothing left but a skull, the palms of her hands. I mean, there's no body to bury. And Jehu's response was, okay, in fulfillment of the prophet Elijah's warning of what would happen to Ahab and Jezebel and the house of Ahab and his lineage, he said, okay, that has been totally fulfilled, because the directive was clearly there that the house of Ahab was to be destroyed. And when Jehu was anointed king, he was told, destroy the household of Ahab. And he certainly was doing that. And Jezebel would have no grave. And that even in and of itself was the fulfillment of prophecy, though it might have been a little callous on Jehu's part. Despite that, it became a fulfillment of prophecy. Okay, back to our text now. And as I told you, because it's historical, Elisha's not being mentioned, but it proves the fulfillment of those tasks that were given to him. Now we go to 2 Kings chapter 10, verses 1 through 11. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria, and Jehu wrote and sent letters to Samaria, to the rulers of Jezreel, to the elders, and to those who reared Ahab's sons, saying, now as soon as this letter comes to you, since your master's sons are with you, and you have chariots and horses, a fortified city also, and weapons, choose the best qualified of your master's sons, set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they were exceedingly afraid and said, look, 2 kings could not stand up to him. How then can we stand? They're talking among themselves. And he who was in charge of the house, and he who was in charge of the city, the elders also, and those who reared the sons, sent to Jehu, saying, we are your servants. We will do all you tell us, but we will not make anyone king. Do what is good in your sight." Then he, Jehu, wrote a second letter to them, saying, "If you are for me and will obey my voice, take the heads of the men, your master's sons, and come to me at Jezreel by this time tomorrow." Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were rearing them. So it was, when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons and slaughtered 70 persons, put their heads in baskets, and sent them to him, meaning Jehu, at Jezreel. Then a messenger came and told him, saying, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons." And he said, "Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning." So it was in the morning that he went out and stood and said to all the people, "You are righteous. Indeed, I conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these? Now know that nothing shall fall to the earth of the word of the Lord which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab. For the Lord has done what he spoke by his servant Elijah." So Jehu killed all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men and his close acquaintances and his priests, until he left him none remaining. Okay, now we know that Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom. Jezreel was kind of like where Ahab's summer palace was. Okay, we know all that. Now, Ahab and Jezebel are already dead at this point, but Ahab still has lots of living offspring and living advisors and people close to him, and the priests who served him. And that means, in my opinion, that means they were priests to idols, because he was an idol worshiper. So all of these people are going to have to be addressed. And Jezebel's death did not satiate Jehu's passion to see the house of Ahab annihilated. So, okay, what about all these offspring? Now, the text, the language, and I'm sure that's a translation thing, the suggestion is that there is someone over a house, someone over a city, and elders, so that these people are engaged with the job of rearing all of Ahab's sons. So at least some of these are not men, even though the term man is used. So I would have to believe that some of them are still minors, if not all of them, so that there are men who are overseers to take care of them and to make sure that all is well. Now, we know that Jezebel didn't have all those children. So we're understanding that concubines and other wives and other people have borne children by Ahab, and now all of these are still alive. So Jehu is not satisfied with that at all. So he sends a letter to the person in charge of the house, the person in charge of the city, and the elders. And he says, look, Ahab has 70 descendants there. And that issue needs to be addressed. Are you for me? Are you with me? Notice he always asks that. Are you with me? So these men being scared and intimidated, like 2 kings couldn't stand against him. What can we possibly do? So they write back or send a message back that, look, we're for you. We will do exactly what you say. You name it, we'll do it. And so he writes a second letter. If you are for me, if you are with me, if you are on my side, then decapitate, cut off the heads of those 70 potential heirs of Ahab. Now, I skipped a step that proved that Jehu was a subtle, almost sneaky negotiator. His first message said, well, why don't you pick the most worthy of the surviving heirs of Ahab, put him on the throne, and fight for him? And they didn't want to do that. Hence, what put them in the position to now be told to kill them. So they weren't willing to pick one, put him on the throne, and fight for him. So now they're going to have to kill all of them to prove that they're with Jehu. Well, they do that. They take these 70 men, they cut their heads off, they stick their heads in a basket, and deliver those baskets to the gate of Jezreel. Wow. Okay. Now, so Jehu sees what they have done. And remember, he's kind of slick. He's a mental manipulator. He is. And so he says, I conspired against my master, the king Joram, and I killed him. And yes, I had Ahaziah killed too. Now, he killed Joram with his own bow and arrow. Ahaziah actually ran and lived a little while, but he died. The end result was the same. But notice what he says. I killed my master, Joram, but you guys killed all of these heirs of Ahab. Wow, you're righteous people. You stood up for what's right against their wickedness. But basically, he's absolving himself of the guilt of killing these 70 men and basically saying, okay, I didn't do this, you guys did this. He's making them co-conspirators with him and basically passing the buck on that boatload of guilt. He's leaving the impression that he didn't have anything to do with this last round of killings. And though he did not cut off a single head, to say that he was not involved and bore no guilt for that is certainly not true. But then we come back to the fact that he's fulfilling what God said, that the lineage of Ahab would be destroyed. And when that happens, that means the 4 dynasties that rule the northern kingdom would be destroyed. Okay, back to 2 Kings chapter 10, verses 12 through 17. And it says, And he arose and departed and went to Samaria. On the way at Beth-Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met with the brothers of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and said, Who are you? So they answered, We are the brothers of Ahaziah. We have come down to greet the sons of the king and the sons of the queen mother. And he said, Take them alive. So they took them alive and killed them at the well of Beth-Eked, 42 men. And he left none of them. And when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him and said to him, Is your heart right, as my heart is toward your heart? And Jehonadab answered, It is. Jehu said, If it is, give me your hand. So he gave him his hand, and he took him up to him into the chariot. Then he said, Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. So they had him ride in his chariot also. And when he came to Samaria, he killed all who remained to Ahab in Samaria, till he had destroyed them according to the word of the Lord, which he spake to Elijah. Okay, now the death count is rising here. We know that Jehu killed Joram. He had Ahaziah killed. He asked that Jezebel be killed. Then he had the 70 sons of Ahab killed. So the death count is 73 there. And now there are 42 of these guys. So we're looking at a death count approaching 115 and going to pass that. So by this point, all of the real opposition to Jehu, anyone that would pose a significant threat, has basically been eliminated. But in this passage, he meets some more relatives of King Ahaziah. Now, we know that Ahaziah's mother, that's where the part for the connection to King Ahab comes, because Ahaziah was king of Judah. And so these relatives are probably cousins. The text says brothers, but no, these are cousins probably who have come down to visit with these relatives and apparently don't know that Ahaziah is dead. So Jehu has them taken alive, and he takes them down to the well, and he has them killed as well. Okay, he leaves there, and he meets Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. And that man is coming out to meet Jehu. And so he views it as a strategic meeting. And so he questions him. Notice what he always says. He wants to know who's with him. And he says, is your heart right? Is your heart toward me like my heart is toward you? Are you with me? And Jehonadab says it is. And he says, well, if it is, give me your hand. And when he takes his hand, he pulls him up into the chariot, and he then says, okay, come with me, because I am going to show you how zealous for the Lord I really am. You'll be right with me because you say you are with me. Now, do you see again that psychological warfare is still Jehu's preferred methodology? He is taking Jehonadab with him because basically what he does will then be, or at least will appear to be, affirmed by Jehonadab. Now this is really interesting because historians record, specifically Josephus, that Jehonadab approved of what Jehu did. So apparently he told the truth when he said, my heart is with you. So notice what Jehu does when he goes to Samaria. Now, we're not in Jezreel, we're in Samaria, the capital city, and Ahab has friends who were close, advisors, those priests that served him, and so basically Jehu's going to wipe them out too. He's going to kill anyone who supported, had a strong connection to, or could possibly be argued was an heir to the throne through Ahab. Wow. Now, Jehu is going to continue that mental manipulation technology stuff he uses. But here's my technique. I guess it's not technology, is it? But it is a technique. So we'll see him continue to do that. Let's go back to our text, and we're in chapter 10, verses 18 to 28. Now Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little. Jehu will serve him much he's not telling the truth. He's playing them. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his servants, and all his priests. Let no one be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. But Jehu acted deceptively with the intent of destroying the worshipers of Baal. So he says, okay, specifically, all you prophets, you priests, and you direct servants of Baal, you come to this great sacrifice I'm going to offer to Baal, because other kings have served Baal, but I will outdo them. And anyone who doesn't come to my sacrifice will die. Now, the truth of the matter is everyone who comes will die, but he is again being deceptive. And Jehu said, verse 20, proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it. Then Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. So they came into the temple of Baal, and the temple of Baal was full from one end to the other. And he said to the one in charge of the wardrobe, bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal. So he brought out vestments for them. Then Jehu and Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, went into the temple of Baal and said to the worshippers of Baal, search and see that no servants of the Lord are here with you. We don't want anybody in here who's not an idol worshiper, but only the worshippers of Baal. So they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had appointed for himself 80 men on the outside, and had said, if any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escapes, whoever lets him escape, it shall be his life for the life of the other. Now it happened, as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the captains, go in and kill them. Let not one come out. And they killed them with the edge of the sword. Then the guards and the officers threw them out and went into the inner room of the temple of Baal. And they brought the sacred pillars out of the temple of Baal and burned them. Then they broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and tore down the temple of Baal and made it a refuse dump to this day. Then Jehu destroyed Baal from Israel. Now, okay, the people are suspicious of him. I mean, he's killed 2 kings and descendants of Ahab. And so what's this guy up to? So he attempts to put their suspicions to rest. And so he says, look, I am declaring a solemn assembly for Baal. I'm going to offer a greater sacrifice than any other king has offered. And you need to come. If you're a Baal worshiper, you need to come. And then he makes it clear, if you're not a Baal worshiper, you don't need to be here. Now, he sends for the vestments, the clothing. So apparently, he wants to make sure that all of the Baal priests are going to be killed. That's a primary objective here. So he wants them decked out in what they wear to make sure. So everyone in that outer area jammed into that temple are killed. Then into the inner area where the high priests or the highest ranking priests would be, he makes sure that soldiers are sent into there, that people are sent into there, and that they are all killed, and that the sacred pillars. Now, if you've been with me when we studied some of the minor prophets, you know that there were some pillars or posts that were involved in the worship of these idols. Those are broken down and destroyed. The temple is destroyed. His agenda is to eradicate Baal worship from among the people of the northern kingdom. Now, clearly, God has been fed up with the northern kingdom. They've been worshiping idols. He's allowed Hazael to torment them, but he is not yet to the point to where he's ready to allow them to be totally overrun, their homeland just decimated, many of them hauled off, other people resettled into the area. He's not to that point yet. But that's coming, because we know that despite many opportunities and reprieves and prophetic warnings and all of the things, that the people didn't really repent. So it appears that Baal worship has been effectively addressed. But there's a problem. Now, it's hard for us to understand how God would initiate, cause, or even allow all of these people to be destroyed. I mean, we had a pretty good head count before we ever got around to the priests and the Baal worshipers. Some Bible scholars believe that these were primarily leaders, maybe, of the Baal worship. But if you've pretty much rendered Baal worship swept out, you would think things would be in good shape, but guess what? They're not. There are still 2 golden calves. Now, if you've been with me through any kind of studies at all, you know that after Solomon's rule, when his son took the throne, he didn't use wisdom. He overly taxed the people. The kingdom split. And God told Jeroboam, when he was going to make him king over the northern kingdom, follow my ways. Stay true to my covenant. If you do it, blessings will overtake you. If you don't, there will be horrific consequences. And the first thing he did was to set up a golden calf in Bethel, which was almost on the border between the northern and southern kingdom, and had previously been a place of mighty visitations of God. Excuse me. And it had been turned into a center of worship for a golden calf. And he put a second one in the northern kingdom in the area that had been settled by the tribe of Dan. Well, guess what? We're getting rid of Baal. But those golden calves are still right there. And Jehu is not going to address worship of those golden calves at all. I don't know whether he tolerated it for political reasons. Some Bible scholars think he did that as kind of a token. I don't know. I don't know that if he actually participated openly in worshiping them, but I'm going to tell you his son ends up doing that, and there's a strong message for us as parents, because what we tolerate, our children will participate in, because they'll one-up us. Well, okay, before I get carried away, let me go back and read this text because my time is flying. However, Jehu did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, there it is, who made Israel sin, that is, from the golden calves that were at Bethel and Dan. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in doing what is right in my sight, you annihilated the household of Ahab, that was right. You addressed the Baal worshipers, that was right. And have done to the house of Ahab all that was in my heart, your sons shall sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart, for he did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, who made Israel to sin. There it is, those golden calves. In those days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel, and Hazael conquered them in all the territory of Israel. Okay, you won't follow my law. I'll let you lose territory and people to your enemies, because there are consequences for defying God. Okay, so from the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh, from Aroer, which is by the river Arnon, including Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu, all that he did, and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Jehu rested with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Then Jehoahaz, his son, reigned in his place, and the period that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. So Jehu was anointed at the direction of God. He did the primary directive that God gave him, but he did not walk after God, even though he was zealous and passionate in his elimination of Ahab's dynasty. He was passionate and persistent in his elimination of Baal worship. But he did not have a heart for God, a heart that literally beat for the covenant, the law, the ways, and the will of God. He did not serve God with his whole heart. We know that Jeremiah recorded, if we seek him with our whole heart, we'll find him. And the plan he has for us will be good. Now, we know that what he had done was bloodthirsty. What he had done had been very bold. We know that he was following God's directive, but he stopped short of being a man sold out to God. He allowed the worship of those golden calves for the whole entirety of his 28-year rule. Oh my goodness. He had more interest in his personal agenda, his own ambitions, in having his sons rule after him, than in seeing total spiritual reform of Israel. We have to believe, we have to know, we know the heart of God. He wanted all idol worship gone. He wanted Israel to turn back to him with their whole heart, and that did not happen. The descendants of Jehu were going to pay for that. If you were with me when we studied the book of Hosea, Hosea 1:4 says, "Then the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. For a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel." So his descendants were going to pay. We pass things along. Now, God's not sitting up in heaven saying he's going to punish our kids because we're sinful. But kids learn what they live. And if they learn godlessness and unholy behaviors and defiance of God in our home, they'll replicate that. Only remember what I just said. They'll do all we did plus some. Now, I'm not going to read the next couple of chapters because they deal totally with the southern kingdom in the aftermath of the death of Ahaziah on the orders of Jehu, and they really don't have anything directly connecting them to Elisha. Let me just make a few brief comments. The mother of Ahaziah, she was the daughter of Ahab. She was the widowed wife of Joram or Jehoram, it's written both ways, of Judah, and she did the unthinkable when she found out that her son was dead. She immediately tried to eliminate all heirs to the throne. I mean, she killed her own grandchildren, but she missed one. She seized the throne, not realizing in the aftermath of that bloodbath that an heir had been protected, because Jehoshaphat, who was the daughter of King Joram, that meant she was the half-sister of Ahaziah. They would have had a different mother. She was the half-sister of Ahaziah, and she grabbed little Joash, who was a baby, and she hid him. Her husband was the high priest to the Lord during this 6 years that followed the time that Athaliah seized the throne. And they actually hid little Joash in the temple. Well, she didn't go there because she didn't worship God. So we've got this baby whisked away by a relative with his nurse. He had to have someone to nurse him, and protected in the temple. And Jehoiada was the high priest and was the husband of Jehoshaphat. And they kept this little baby safe until he was 7 years old. And then there was this elaborate plot to have him crowned king and to protect him in the process. And it involved temple guards being relieved and all of the companies staying instead of one group being relieved and left, and protecting him and having him declared king and have the people shout. And Athaliah heard it, and they assassinated her as well. Oh my goodness, she was a wicked, wicked woman. She was the only woman to rule in Judah. Certainly her motives were impure. Her vindictive, murderous heart was on display, but she's not really our focus here. Now, Joash, he did a basically good job as long as he remained under the influence of Jehoiada. However, during his 16-year reign, toward the end of that time, he wasn't exactly right. He started off well. He didn't finish too well. But again, that's another story, and it's about Judah. Our focus has primarily been on the northern kingdom. So let me go back there, because Elisha's life is not quite finished, and the tasks that he had been given are going to be wrapped up. 2 Kings 13, 14 to 21 in a hurry. Elisha had become sick with the illness of which he would die. Then Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over him and said, "Oh, my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." That's familiar to us. And Elisha said to him, "Take a bow and some arrows." So he took himself a bow and some arrows, and then he said to the king of Israel, "Put your hand on the bow." So he put his hand on it, and Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. And he said, "Open the east window." And he opened it. Then Elisha said, "Shoot." And he shot, and he said, "The arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For you must strike the Syrians at Aphek till you have destroyed them." Then he said, "Take the arrows." So he took them, and he said to the king of Israel, "Strike the ground." So he struck 3 times and stopped. And the man of God was angry with him and said, "You should have struck 5 or 6 times, then you would have struck Syria till you had destroyed it. But now you will strike Syria only 3 times. Then Elisha died, and they buried him, and the raiding bands from Moab invaded the land in the spring of the year. So it was as they were burying a man that suddenly they spied a band of raiders, and they put the man in the tomb of Elisha. And when the man was let down and touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. Okay, Elisha's sick, and it's serious enough that Joash, who's still ruling, comes to see him. And because, unfortunately, Elisha's going to die, we see here these final interactions with the king. Now, some people are going to say, well, why did he die? Elijah didn't die. No. Why do good people die? Because we still function under that sin curse. Death is going to be the final foe that's defeated. We get it. So, Joash is a pretty good man, but I wouldn't call him godly by this stage of his life. And he wonders where on earth the source of wisdom and divine direction that Elisha has provided is going to come at this point. Who's going to step up and fill that role? And he obviously recognizes that God is the ultimate defender of his people. So Elisha says, look, take a bow and an arrow and open the east window. Elisha places his hands on top of the king's and he says, shoot. And then the indication is given that that arrow represents the deliverance of the Lord from Syria. Then he says, take arrows and strike the ground. The king strikes the ground 3 times, but that's all. Elisha's angry with him. Why did you only strike 3 times? Now you're only going to attack and be successful 3 times against Syria. You needed 5 or 6 to put them in their place and to protect yourself for the future. Now, clearly, Joash does not have what it takes to follow through and do the plan of God. I need to stop and pause here. This Joash is not the one who started ruling when he was 7. This is a Jehoash or Joash, and both Southern Kingdom and Northern Kingdom write the names of those kings those 2 ways. So it's so confusing. This is a king from the Northern Kingdom. And so he disappoints Elijah when it becomes clear he just does not have what it takes to follow through and to honor God and follow the directions of the Lord and totally defeat Syria. So that was Elisha's final interaction with a king of the Northern Kingdom. He dies. Those who honor and respect him, very likely sons of the prophets, take his body to be buried. They see raiders who are Moabites coming. My impression is that scared them. They probably need to hide. So they quickly throw the body of, and that's not Elisha's body. I beg your pardon. Elisha's buried. And there are some people, probably by sons of the prophets, he was buried. But there are some people with a dead man. They're afraid. They throw this dead man's body, I will get it right, into the burial place of Elisha, who by now is bones. Once the dead man's body touches the bones or the remains of Elisha, he immediately stands back up and comes to life. And that miracle finishes exactly what God had agreed to or given through Elijah to Elisha. Double the number of miracles, including, remember, Elijah only raised 1 boy from the dead, making Elisha have 2 raised from the dead, as his life fully exemplified that double portion of the Lord that had rested on them. Well, Syria continued to plague the Northern Kingdom all throughout the reign of Jehoahaz and all that his family line there, but God was gracious. He didn't destroy them yet because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Shortly after that, after the man was raised from the dead before touching the bones of Elisha, Hazael died, ending everything that God had said that Elijah should do that was completed through Elisha, the young man that Elijah mentored. Well, I hope you enjoyed the study of both of those old prophets. There's been a lot of the miraculous. There's been a lot of this king ruled there and this other king ruled over here, and because that's what 1st and 2nd Kings is. And I will tell you that, remember, they were originally 1 book, and at times it's very confusing because of the overlap of names, and at times I may have confused you by struggling with the names myself. But there is so much to learn from these 2 prophets and their faithfulness to God. God, help us be as committed to carry out your plan as these 2 faithful servants of the Lord were. In the meantime, I hope you'll be back with me next time as we start a brand new study. Until I see you then, God bless.